12 weeks with various teachers, we're going to be doing a study of the book of Psalms. And you know, we can't even get started without some controversy, because the word psalm is an English word, and according to some, it represents the Hebrew singing of praises. And yet another group will tell you that it means instrumental music, literally twanging of the harp. But I think what we understand it best is that it's spiritual songs. Because the book of Psalms, inspired of God, written by men, is a book of poetry or songs. And they were sung by the Jews. I imagine they maybe still are. I'm not a Jew, so I wouldn't know. But they were sung by the early church. And I don't know if we could sing all of them, but I think we'd be surprised. We probably could find a tune that we could all keep and be in unison. We could probably sing most of the songs ourselves. Back in the day when we used songbooks, I used to look them over and pull in the back, because in the back of the songbooks, they used to have a list of verses and songs that were inspired by those verses. And if you went to songs, it went on and on and on. Songs that either were inspired by, songs that were derived from, songs that even quoted this book of Psalms. To name a few, as the deer panteth for water, Psalm 42. A mighty fortress is our God, Psalm 46. Oh, worship the King of the glorious above, 104. Bring in the sheaves, 126. Come thou almighty King, 144. Hallelujah, praise Jehovah, Psalm 148. And this is just a small portion of this, just to give you a taste and an idea. Because notice I didn't mention anything about Psalm 23. And most psalm books have 2, 3, 4 songs that we derive from that. There are 150 chapters in the book of Psalm, so it actually has the most chapters in the entire book. But if that leads you to think that it's the longest book in the Bible, you would be mistaken. Because by word count, Jeremiah happens to be the longest, or whatever that's worth. I found the numbers that said it was written between 1531 BC to 444 BC. I'm not a numbers guy in that standpoint, and I don't know if it means a lot, but just to give you a rough idea, that's nearly 1,100 years for this book to be written by each of its authors. If you're asked, well, who is the author? Most folks would generally say, well, it's written by David. And you would be at least partly, because David is credited with at least 73 of the Psalms. But they were also written by Moses, the sons of Asaph, Solomon, Heman, Ethan, and that leaves about 50 or 1/3 of the books that we have absolutely no idea who the author was, other than God. All kinds of ways to divide this book up. Many of them divided up into chapters and 5 different blocks. And I can read out those numbers to you, but I don't think it really mean a lot. But one of the divisions I had might give you an idea about what you're getting ready to study. It says there are Psalms of moral contrast, messianic prophecy, lamentation, penitence, praise and adoration, and invoke and curses against the wicked. You might have a little problem singing some of those maybe. The thing that makes Psalms really kind of unusual, it's not like the book of Job where you have a sequence, a story that's being told, and you follow from one chapter to another. It's not like the book of Corinthians where in chapter 2 of Corinthians, Paul is building on what he said in chapter 1. Each psalm stands alone. It has its own message, and Psalm 1 may or may not even have anything to do at all with Psalm chapter 2. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but there used to be little Bibles that got handed out from place to place that had the New Testament and the book of Psalms. Did you ever wonder why it had the book of Psalms with it? I can't be adamant But my thought is, maybe they included the book of Psalms because in the New Testament there are over 100 quotes of the book of Psalms. And there are over 400 allusions. Now, what is an allusion? Well, best I can get from that is either a near quote or a quote of a phrase, or at least the idea is carried forward. And we'll look at a couple of those today. Now, we're going to study today Psalm 2. And it's one of those that does not have an author. Sort of, kind of, maybe. While there's none that is identified, if we look at Acts 4, verse 25, who by the mouth of your servant David has said, why do the nations rage and the people plot vain things? We see very shortly that Psalm 2, verse 1 says, and the people plot a vain thing, and that's the difference. So whether you call this a quote or whether you call it a allusion, because it is a near quote, the New Testament pretty much identifies Psalm 2 as written by David. But in the end, it was written by God, and that's what's most important about us. Any comments at this point?
Yeah. I'm not exactly 100% sure, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think the idea of that Psalms and the New Testament being written in a small Bible was given out during around 1945 or so. I'm not sure the exact year, but I think that's when they started it. And the reason they did it is there's a lot of reference to God protecting you in the book of Psalms. And then you have the New Testament that proclaims Jesus as Savior type stuff. So you have comfort in knowing that God is going to protect you by reading the book of Psalms.
In a smaller version of the Bible.
That's what I heard many years ago, that that's why they did that. I could place that, could be wrong.
Could very well be, John. Thank you. So let's get into our chapter. Psalm chapter 2, verse 3 verses. Why do the nations rage, and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the God and against his anointing, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away the cords from us. Now the NIV says this rage would be maybe better translated conspire. Imagine that. People getting together, conspire against God. You know, we always said that misery loves company, but do we also not think that there's value to being strong together? Well, sure. And do you think people would ever do that, ever get together to plot against God?
They did it. They did it with the Tower of Babel.
Ah.
They did it with the Tower of Babel. They built the
Genesis
tower.
11:4. Thank you. And they said, come let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves.
Yep.
Lest we be scattered across the face of the whole earth.
It wasn't a complete rebellion, but if they could do that, they would have done a complete rebellion.
It doesn't matter how many we gather together, how big a stink or how big a fight we put up, we are not going to be better than God.
No.
And I like what Psalm 93 says, particularly after what's happened in the last couple of months. The Lord on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, than the mighty waves of the seas. If you were in those North Carolina mountains, I wonder what you would think about this verse. What sound did you hear? How mighty was that sound? The idea of breaking the bonds. I find that one interesting because in Matthew 11:30 we read, for my yoke is easy, my burden is light. I don't know how often you read writings by old preachers, particularly old denominational preachers, and I am always amazed that some of these guys were so smart and they knew so much and made great comments, and then when it came to salvation, they just fell off and they didn't get it. Well, one of those guys was Charles Spurgeon. He was a Baptist preacher in the 1800s. Apparently a pretty sharp guy, except he didn't understand salvation. So I guess he really didn't understand God. But I think he understands this particular point when he says, to a graceless neck, the yoke of Christ is intolerable. But to the saved sinner, it is easy and light. We may judge ourselves by this. Do we love that yoke, or do we wish to cast it from us? Think about that yoke. We are under the law of liberty. How many blessings do we receive based on that law? How many different ways does God take care of you if you follow that law? Anybody want to give me some examples?
Really, it's a number that's endless. It's a number that is endless. I call last number. But the very air that we breathe, our next breath, is a blessing from God. And if folks would just follow that golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do to you, you would probably be a good guy. And you probably would receive God's blessings. You would receive God's blessings if you followed the golden rule. The biggest thing that I know with this church here, this group of people, is controversial. We don't always do that.
For those who couldn't hear, Charlie's comment was golden rule. And how when we do that, we are blessed. And that we often fall short on that. Let's look at it this way. Do you wish that your neighbors all around you were Christians or not?
Well,
What morality do we have? What kindness, what goodness do we see without God? Just a thought. Verse 4. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall behold them in a derision. He said mankind, when they do this, is a laughing stock. They're fooling themselves. And to that, I'd like to go to Job. Job chapter 38, verses 3 to 7. Listen to these questions that God asked Job. Now, prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were the foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted with joy? God just put Job in his place. And isn't the same true for us? When we think we are all so smart and we know so much, do we really? Who are we to conspire against God?
and there's a true
I think that we can get by there. You know, people are very smart, but we must always remember where this comes from. And if we are steadfast to give God, you know, for these blessings and think about these blessings that we have, and don't try to assume that we're smarter than God. And if we can follow His word and His teaching just when it's convenient, I mean, if we try to do that and think that He doesn't see that, we are really fooling ourselves. God will bless if we follow His word. If we talked about the neighbors there before, I've got some neighbors that one of them now has caused me a lot of problems over the years But you know, I think the way you gotta look at it is if that neighbor needs help, you need to go down there and get him. And pray for him. And maybe he'll see by example how a Christian should live and should conduct himself. I hope that makes a little sense.
I can't repeat everything that Charlie said, but for those of you online that could not hear, his basic point is, who are we to think that God's not watching us? And that's true. God's throne is in heaven. Where are we? Then he shall speak to them in wrath and distress them in his displeasure. Yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. Verses 5 and 6. How far do you have to read? How many times do you have to read in the Old Testament when God is not happy with man? When he punishes the disobedient, the unbeliever, and the idol worshiper.
Noah's Ark is a good example. He flooded the earth.
You see it again and again, don't we? And the second part of that verse, I will set my king. He did set his king, his son, Jesus Christ. Not to be king over Israel, and not to be king of man yesterday, but to be king of man yesterday, today, tomorrow. He is the king over all, for all, forevermore. And yes, this is a messianic prophecy song. I will declare the decree, the Lord said to me. You are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, and the ends of the earth for your possession. And you shall break them with a rod of iron, and you shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. I don't like to run away from hard verses. I can't always promise you that I have an answer to the hard verses, but I'm going to point them out and we can think about it. Today you are my son. Today I have begotten you. And now we just jump into the fire. Because what does begotten mean? Well, typical in our language, begotten would mean gave birth to, father or mother, produced.
Yeah.
Was Jesus Christ born? Was he created?
Yes. He was
No,
born.
he was not created.
Well, he was born in the flesh.
And that's the whole point, and that's the controversy. Christ was not born. He was with God from the beginning. And we can created everything there was to be created. But the problem is we don't get any help sometimes in the New Testament. Colossians 1:15 says, He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Oh, the firstborn. Again, we're talking about being born. It said a better translation of that would be begotten before all creation. But let's think what that really means. Let's go back to the Old Testament and look at Esau. Remember the guy who sold his birthright? As the firstborn, there were blessings that were coming to Esau, and Esau alone before he sold it. And I think that's what Colossians is all about in this verse. It's talking about the relationship. It's talking about Jesus Christ as the firstborn was going to be the recipient of. Not the fact saying that he was born. That's a relationship that we understand, just like we understand that Esau was to get more than his brother. And then verse 16 and on, it talks about where all things were created by and through Jesus Christ. But if we go back to where we started, after that troublesome verse, begotten you. If begotten doesn't mean created, well then what does it mean? Is it figurative? Is it a metaphor? Is it something that is put there for man to understand? Because most of us, if not all of us, understand, at least to some degree, the relationship between a father and a son. Very, very, very close. Is that not true about God the Father and God the Son? Makes sense to me. Others say that it has nothing to do about the word, it's more about the anointing God. And then the last one is where we get into deep waters, I like to say. Because there are many folks that say this is about Christ being raised from the dead. How do you get there? I will share this with you and let you decide where you want to go. Some of the quotes, Psalm 2, Acts 13:33. He has fulfilled this for us, their children, and that he has raised up Jesus. And it is also written in the second Psalm, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." If you take that literally, it's implying that God the Father is saying that Jesus rises from the grave, today I have begotten you. Hebrews 5:5. So also Christ did not glorify himself to become high priest, but was he who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." When was Christ officially high priest?
When he was baptized,
When was the veil torn?
when he died.
When he died. Did Christ act as a priest? Did he try to supplant the high priest when he was here on this earth?
No,
No.
he didn't.
So when did he fully assume the role?
When he died.
When he died and after he rose. So that's the evidence, whether you agree, whether you understand, whether it fits your thought. That's what people would say, that God was talking, I have begotten you. He was talking about when Christ rose from the grave. Folks, that's the best I got. Anybody want to add anything? Anybody have a comment? Because this is a controversy that I do not expect to answer today. It's for your thinking and for your study. And that's the best I can do.
I think just God's approval comes into that also. Again, as you say, it's difficult to know exactly what he had in mind. But even John 3:16, the only begotten Son, ultimately goes back to God sending Christ to die. But I think also there is that idea of that was God's plan, that was God's approval, that was God's way of expressing his love, all of that combined.
There are religious groups that would say that Christ was created. There are religious groups that can't name them all. We begin to try just would mess us up. Why would you do that? Because now you make Christ less, right? If they'd only used the word begotten, there's lots of good stuff on begotten son, only begotten son.
Well, that's where you mix up, because he was born as a human baby, was he not?
Colby, I'm sorry, buddy, but you are so far back in my ears, they're just not.
He was born as a human child, was he not? When they give the story of the manger.
He was born on this earth, that's right. But Christ existed long before he was born.
Oh, yeah.
On this earth. That's the whole point. They're talking about
Okay.
Christ being the
Alright.
beginning. If they only in these verses had used only begotten, because what only begotten means is really pretty clear. It's a likeness. It's like a form of. The idea is, you see Christ, you see God. And isn't that what Jesus himself said? You've seen the Father, you've seen me. That's what only begotten means. But we don't have the blessing of only in this verse. So that makes it, in my mind, a little hard. But also, to me, still implies the idea of the shared relationship. As I said, like Esau would have had as a birthright. Tough one.
Well, Esau's different. Esau's so different.
And another quote. Which of you did the angel say, Behold, you are my son, today I have begotten you. And again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. Hebrews 1:5. And we know Hebrews is about showing the Jews that Jesus is so much better than the law. So much better.
Oh, yeah, because Jesus.
And that's why he compares it to angels. Angels ain't nothing.
So all of him wants.
And then some of the allusions in verse 9. 1 minute. Break them with a rod of iron. Revelation 2:26-27. He who overcomes and keeps my works until the end, to him I will give power over the nations. He shall rule them with a rod of iron. They shall be dashed to pieces like the potter's vessel, as I also have received from my Father. Revelation 12:9. She bore a male child who was to rule the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was called up God in his throne. Revelation 19:15. Now out of his mouth comes a sharp sword, that we should strike the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress in the fierceness and the wrath of the Almighty God. What these three do for me, they identify the character. Because since I know back in the Psalms where the quote came from, they're talking about Jesus Christ. And Revelation just got a tiny bit easier for me to understand. Because of these three verses, they're all talking about Jesus. And Psalms help me understand. Nice to keep all my pages together. Conveniently skip over verse 8. Give you the nations for your inheritance. Comments about that? Somebody should have something to say. He will give Christ as an inheritance, all the nations. What does that bring to your mind?
Overall,
Jim says overall. Without a doubt. Lord?
First time we hear about all nations was the promise that God gave to Abraham, that all nations would be blessed through his seed.
Yeah.
Pat just said the promise, the blessing given to Abraham, all nations shall be blessed through. Great one. Great one. No man cometh to the Father but through
The Son.
the Son. Absolutely holy. And then one that I generally would skip over, I would miss for some reason. John 5:22. For the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to to the Son. It's pretty hard to say, isn't it? Raising that quite simple. Christ is going to be the judge. Does that make sense? Consider that it's through his blood we are saved. That he's the one that died for us. So he will not only be Savior, but also Lord over us.
Another reference to Jesus being the judge, Revelation 21:7, where we read about the Lamb's Book of Life, and if you're not found written in it, or judged according by it, we don't get into heaven.
Yeah.
More comments? Finish up the chapter, verses 10 through 12. Now therefore, be wise, O kings, be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are those who put their trust in him. Kiss, does that seem a little weird to you in that verse? Kiss the Son, lest he be angry. Who do you kiss? Someone
Know
you
who
love?
you love.
Someone you love? That makes sense?
Mom, your dad, your
Just the
best
Son?
friend, your sister.
Love the Son? Care about, care for the Son? Fits to me. Laugh at me if you will. These verses to me seem like a short version of Revelation. A very short version, nonetheless. Because it talks about the evil, the bad, being punished. You shall perish in the way when his wrath is kindled but a little. But the song ends with this. Blessed are those who put their trust in him. So the reason I see that it's like Revelation, this little psalm shows us that from beginning to end of man, who's in control? Is God, without a doubt, without a challenge. And yet, how does it all end? Good guys win. I think it's a great little song, but I may not have given any attention to it if I hadn't. This is rare. I counted up a lesson. Rick finished on time, even a little bit early. Comments? Any thoughts about Psalms in general, about this one?
We have to remember that in order to please him, we have to submit to him. And that right there alone gave you. And Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Lord.
For those who say that God is a loving God, that's where they stop, right? Because that fact alone is absolutely true. But if that's where you stop, then we don't also say that God is a just God. What about the rod of iron?
God is also a vengeful God. Jealous. He is jealous as well.
Obie says he's jealous, and absolutely right. He is not mocked.
Exactly.
What do you see when you see that rod of iron?
Vengeance.
Right?
He's taking vengeance on Satan. Wrath.
Vengeance. Punishment. So to those who say that God is a loving God and everything's gonna work out and everybody's gonna be happy and we're all gonna sing around the campfire and rejoice together. Did you read that in this little song? Bob and Iron. Last chance. Thank you for your time and for your